Hello and welcome to the Transfer Flow podcast. And on today's episode, Bayern got held to a draw by Leverkusen at the weekend, but how special is what Vincent Kompany is doing right now? Manchester United suffered a battering at the hands of Spurs. Everyone can see the problems, but how do they deal with their midfield porosity and how do they think about the next coach to take over Ten Hag's seat? And then we take a look at Chelsea and Cole Palmer. Cole Palmer playing like one of the best in the world, but can he actually sustain that position? With a final look at the Madrid Derby too. That's all coming up on today's episode. So, we're back for another episode. I am Patrick Van Straten, and I'm joined by Ted Knutson. How are you doing?
I'm all right. So I have a question for you.
Oh, God.
Now, somebody brought up how good your transition from old cheese and takes aging well was in the past. You mentioned in sort of the intro piece about a word called porosity.
Yeah.
How confident are you that's a real word?
Pretty confident, reasonably confident.
Okay. You like a
viscosity, porosity. Normally they work that way, right?
We think the English language works that way because like this is a language that has sandwich and Norwich, and I'm endlessly confused about the variations inside of it.
Yeah, but those are proper nouns, Ted. Come on. This is Latin. This is Latin.
A sandwich is simply a thing. Norwich, who even knows what that is? Some small champion. Actually, they're playing midweek, and we want to bet on them in the weekend. So that was nice. Where did you want to start today, sir?
I think we flagged it as the biggest game of the weekend in the newsletter before the weekend. Bayern versus Bayer Leverkusen. This is a matchup of, well, technically, actually, the team that won the Bundesliga last season, the team that came third. So, is it the biggest game? But Bayern have had a pretty lethal start to the season. I think that's fair to say. They and Leverkusen, their numbers last season were absolutely astonishing, partially helped by the fact that the bottom rung of the Bundesliga is, I would not say it's the best football I've ever seen. But this was an interesting game. It ended up, I think, 1.2 to 0.1 on expected goals, Bayern versus Leverkusen there. Bayern had 18 shots. Leverkusen had 3 shots.
3.
Yeah, exactly.
Not so big there.
I don't like it.
Because you're an anti-Bayern fan?
No, I don't like taking 3 shots in a game. I consider that to be suboptimal. Is my my lethal take.
I figured that as an Arsenal fan, you can also have just like PTSD about Bayern and be like, no, not ever. I don't have bad feelings about Leverkusen, but Bayern just bring back all the bad beatings in the past.
Definitely. Yeah, I think
hang on, I got to show this off. So I didn't realize. Oh, my camera's following me now. Even worse. This is like the worst cut ever. But I wanted to start buying like some goofy T-shirts to wear, and so this is Ramen Dog here. And then what I found out was that like it's never in frame, so like I actually have to do goofy things with my thing. I'm trying to spruce up the show here, and eventually we'll have a backdrop, and maybe we'll have like goofy video game backdrops or something like that. I don't know. Maybe you'll have Mario Brothers in the background, and we'll get sued by Nintendo. But back to your football take. I just wanted attention for a moment. That's all.
It makes me feel like I'm about to get in on a GameStop short squeeze. That's how this feels to me.
All right, excellent. Like we now know Patrick's understanding of investing. He knows about shorts. He knows about GameStop, and he knows about mustaches. I feel like you're more of a Poirot type man.
I don't think I have it in me to wax this moustache. I'm not sure that's possible. It also gets pulled out of shape by my children quite a lot. But look, if it's what people want, I just think people should tell us in the comments if it's what they want, and we can make it happen.
And the people do watch the show for Patrick, so like maybe Patrick's mustache could be a stretch goal for some future fundraiser that we run on here.
Oh my God! All right, let's get back to football. But I can't deal with this level of scrutiny.
Okay, so one of the reasons why I want to talk about this game, aside from the fact that it was like a big deal, is how under the radar Bayern are right now, and they are unbelievable at stifling shots. And I did not expect that to continue into this weekend. And I don't know if it was part of a plan from Alonso to kind of play anti-football against Bayern at home or not, but like giving 3 shots up to the Bundesliga winners who have lost incredibly few matches over the course of the last season is out of this world good. And so the expected goals are basically, a 1-goal gap. Bayern very unlucky to not win this game. I think Serge Gnabry probably feels the worst about it. He hit the post with a right foot or left footed shot, and then he hit the upright off of the rebound from hitting the post with his other foot, and that went off out for I think a goal kick. It was a dominant game, and we talked a little bit about Barcelona, and you and Ravi have talked more in the midweek shows about how good they are right now, how good Hansi Flick has been, and sort of taking what is a very young crew and kind of an old crew and not a lot of middle, and sandwiching that or Barcelona team into something that's very, very functional. Kompany unexpectedly is playing great football with these guys, and the thing that I think is most notable is that press is really firing. So while the world might have slept on Bayern coming into this summer, and probably we made fun of them for some of their natural goofiness that they happen to have as a club and all the people that turned them down, it looks like in the end this hire is going to be pretty great. Their summer was actually pretty decent. We thought it was fine, and they'll turn some things over next summer as well. But yeah, they look really dangerous and potentially very dangerous around Europe, where I think what was the final score last week? Was it 9? 7 or 9?
9-2.
It was a very large
9-2.
number. Yeah.
It was an odd number.
Yeah, thank you. 9 and 2's not, but 9 is.
That's the kind of numerical literacy that we bring to this. Okay, so to give some context to what you're saying about their stifling defense, they came into this match off the back of holding Bremen to 0 shots in the previous game. Over their last 3 Bundesliga matches, they've conceded 8 shots total. In that time, they've scored 12 goals. So it is not easy to get shots against them. Now, to play devil's advocate a little bit, Leverkusen, it did seem like their plan for this game was, we'll let Bayern do some stuff, but we'll try and stop them doing the really, really dangerous stuff. So Kane didn't have a shot through 86 minutes. Leverkusen played quite conservatively. You can tell by the PPDA, Bayern's is 7, and Leverkusen's is 23. So that to me is not like the most proactive defense. And Bayern's shot value in this game was roughly 0.06 xg per shot. So
few great chances, a lot of stuff from like wide in the channels. So they were not able to get great central shots. Like it was 2 good teams that were out there, a little bit worried. Leverkusen kind of happy to play counterpuncher. The Andrich goal, I don't think was. I mean, it was fine. And then I actually thought that Bayern's goal was a mistake by the goalkeeper. Like, I think he misread that. He didn't see it. And then by the time that he came back, like his reaction was pretty late. But I thought that like there were a bunch of good chances, and it's mostly just notable because the numbers that you described earlier happen very, very rarely for any teams across any league. Bayern, had a thankful blip for the world last year in which they did not win the title. And I think the Bundesliga is better when they're a little bit fragile and rocky. But when they look this good and the defense is this sort of, I guess, suffocating, and they're also playing in the Champions League and they're putting up 9-2s in the Champions League, like you're like, that's something we should probably pay attention to. And so one of the things that analytics does is it helps flag storylines earlier than you might get to in sort of the media. And so this is something where, maybe it's a little boring. You've seen this before, but like this looks like a possibly legendary Bayern team early on. It's something to keep an eye on. We're not anointing them awesome yet, but they're certainly, if you had to watch them and you don't mind watching teams just beat the bejesus out of the small teams, like that's what's going to happen for a while.
It's interesting because Tuchel, who obviously left this job last year, it's not, I would argue, the finest work of his career at Bayern. And I think that's partially, affected by the fact that Bayern's club hierarchy are not people who you particularly want to have dealings with, in my opinion. Unless you're like the warden of a prison, in which case you are going to deal with quite a few of them, I guess. But can we say that? I think that's pretty fine. So does this upgrade our view of Kompany? Because coming in after somebody like Tuchel and making the team look this good is a pretty astonishing achievement.
I think it does. I think Burnley are struggling a bit this year in the championship. Not necessarily on their league table at the moment, but certainly on the metrics. I think Kompany did the right thing for his career. And I think he did quite an interesting thing last season with Burnley in the Premier League, which is basically we're going to play exactly the same style. We're going to play ball dominant. We ran the table effectively in the championship. We were awesome there, and we're going to see what happens when we do the exact same principles in the Premier League. And obviously, they got beaten up a bunch because it's a very, very difficult style to play outside of highly talented players. It's not impossible to do so, but Burnley are quite a far distance away from even a West Ham in terms of quality of squad. And then he's like, all right, so I've done that. I've got the opportunity for a good job. It's time for me to go do something next. And Bayern took a risk. He has won titles. So actually, it's funny. They went old school, which is kind of what Bayern always does, right? They have a bunch of old German players that run the club, and they just go old school all the time. They went old school with an idea, which is that we're going to hire an elite former player who has an interesting style of play that we're going to allow to come into the dressing room. And he's won enough titles so that the players will be like, oh, he's not a total idiot. And we're going to let him sort of become our coach. That used to be common, right? It used to be, and it's actually something the class of 92 complained about incessantly. Oh, well, there are no jobs for us, even though we deserve it because we were such great players. Well, that's not how most of football works anymore. But Kompany plays and is from the Pep school. And so he's a pretty interesting appointment at this point in sort of the world of football. And he's one of the few players and coaches that have that in his bag.
Despite the influence of Pep being so huge, this is kind of the first time that we've really got a bunch of head coaches at big clubs who are all real disciples of Pep, as in actually learn under Pep. So we've got Kompany, we've got Maresca, we've got Arteta. Does that open something up for a different way of doing things, do you think?
I think that it's interesting to see this. I thought it would happen a lot more over the course of certainly the last 5 to 10 years. I also thought that there would be Klopp disciples. And I think what happened with Klopp is Klopp came out of the Rangnick school. For those of you who don't care about this stuff, I apologize. But Klopp came out of the Rangnick school, the German school of sort of counter-pressing, rock and roll football. He adjusted quite a bit when he came over here, I think. But he also had waves of styles that he played. I think in England with Liverpool, his last 2 years were quite a bit more open in the defensive style. They did not have the aggressive press, possibly because he was worried about the number of minutes his players racked up across all the different competitions. I think it's a little easier when you're only playing 34 in Germany and you're one of the top 2 leagues consistently in talent versus you're playing 38 here plus Champions League depth and all that stuff. So I think people worry that Pep's style is going to be sort of preeminent and continue to propagate elsewhere. What we saw last year is that you still have to have a very high level of talent in order to pull it off.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I think we're going to go on to United and Spurs now, but before we do, I just want to say, you're saying there you thought there were going to be loads of Klopp disciples, but I mean, if there aren't any, then what is David Wagner? As we know, the greatest disciple of Klopp. Okay. That's an in-joke
if you've
for people
done any research whatsoever, and maybe the smallest minimum amount of research, that is the conclusion that you must come to, of course.
Yeah. He's German. He's got glasses. Okay. Let's go on to United Spurs then, seeing as we're talking about managers, and it's almost like there are some question marks around United's management. This game, it cannot be overstated how bad this was for United. I mean, as bad as the scoreline looks, it was so much worse to watch, I would say. So there's been a general consensus this season, I think it's fair to say, just as some background, that United have maybe looked a little bit better than they did last year. It was flagged on the newsletter that they've gone from conceding more shots than anybody's ever seen in their lives to about 10, just under 10, which is good. The defense has become bad in a different way, which is kind of impressive. So they give up really good shots instead of tons and tons of shots. Amazing. But this game, if you give up really good quality shots, this Spurs side is probably not one you want to come up against, because they're going to pile on pressure and probably crack you open. And they just cracked United open again and again and again and again in this game. I mean, the red card might give Ten Hag some cover, but they were already down 12 shots to 3 when Fernandes was sent off. I mean, it was horrific.
At home.
At home.
You can't forget that they were playing at home where they should. So Spurs forever. I mean, like, it does feel like forever. Like, Spurs have been a great team on the break, and part of that, like, it started with Harry Kane being a very good front man at getting runners involved. Right, Kane actually ended up being one of the best assistive frontmen that we've seen in recent times, and part of that was because, like, Spurs often didn't have like many other weapons to go along with him. He and Son had a great partnership, but in order for them to sort of continue to progress, he had to bring players into it. That was a long time ago, and they've continued to maintain that particular identity. They've lost a lot of other identities, but they've maintained that one. And against United, like, they were feasting, and it felt like it happened most of the game. Twitter's a mess these days, but like, one of the best parts about Twitter is you still get to follow the angst of fans that you happen to sort of subscribe to, or their feeds throughout the course of a live sporting match. And Arsenal fans are awful. God, I mean, it's actually too much psychic bombardment when the ref stuff happens and Arsenal fans are moaning for days at a time. Like, I was like, this is too much for me. But United fans are just moaning about their team all the time because they're bad in different ways. As you say, they're finding new ways to be bad. Recently this season, they've only been bad for about 35 minutes at a time. and so you knew that you were going to get a breath of fresh air. This one did not happen. There was no possibility of them coming out the other side after the Fernandes red card, but they were abysmal up until that point. So Seth Partnow, who used to work for me and who used to be the director of research at the Milwaukee Bucks, when Kim wrote last week that they allowed a fullback to run the entire length of the field against them in the Europa League, and he's like, why are we limiting it to fullbacks? Like, feels like anybody could do that. That was particularly prescient, because what happened to to basically open things up for Spurs was not a fullback running the length of the field. It may have been a former fullback, but it happened to be a center back that did it.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really shocking moment, in that I think it before that, it had felt like it was very easy for Spurs to get through the press, and once they were through the press, they were just on the back line again and again and again. But that moment felt like it really was in microcosm everything that had been wrong with this United side up till now. I mean, I appreciate denying the premise of the question there. That's how you get paid the big bucks, by saying, why only fullbacks? Maybe anybody, goalkeepers could run through this entire team. Who knows?
At this point, we would believe it.
Yeah, but it's especially shocking, I think, given that Ugarte came into this team with the aim that, like, okay, if nobody else is going to stop that guy, you could consider doing it, right? Yeah, like, that's kind of your job. And I don't know if he considered doing it, but he didn't really put that much effort into it. And when I look at the lineups, the other thing about this, sorry, I know this is a bit all over the place, but this game was so insane. Was when I looked at the lineups, I thought, this isn't really, it's not like an incredible Spurs team. I mean, like, they had Werner and Johnson out there. The midfield, though, is Maddison and Bentancur. It's not like a team that's going to completely control the game. Like, personnel-wise, I didn't really, there should be fragility in that. And United, I guess, did get some breakaways. But it just always felt like the ball was coming back at them. And I just don't know how they didn't exert any control in the middle of the park.
Well, do you know the big problem with United is controlling the middle of the park, right? Like, it's been that way the whole time. And Kobbie Mainoo was the golden child who was going to fix all of that. Remember? That was what we were told at Euros. Like, clearly he was going to be the best young midfielder in the world, as opposed to actually being a 19-year-old that's really struggling with the pace of the game and doesn't have quite the same skill set as some of the 19-year-olds, say, over in Barcelona right now. That's not to beat up on Mainoo. It's just like they don't have the system to be able to play whatever it is Ten Hag wants to be able to do, or the personnel to be able to do it. Yes. The other danger is like, Arsenal were kind of intimidated a little bit by Spurs and how they wanted to play as well. Partly that was like personnel based, but like, trying to play real football against Spurs, I think, is a bit dangerous right now, because they do have the runners, they've got the legs in there, if they blow something up, like it's coming back at you really fast, and they have some pretty good players who can go both create and finish on that side of it. United have some choices to make, and they made a clear choice in the summertime. We may do like a big actual full pod on this, but they chose to stick by Ten Hag, and they chose to reload in a way that, it did bring in some more Ajax players. It feels like anybody who's Dutch has the possibility of either getting signed or hired by Manchester United. Ruud van Nistelrooy was brought in as a second fiddle, or like assistant coach that could potentially sort of take over if and when Ten Hag gets fired. For me, though, when I look at it, I'm like, look, I think they did a pretty decent job of buying players in their price bracket they shop at right now, and they needed a lot. They just needed, they had so many years of rot that they needed to start addressing. They did an okay job with that. But now the question is, like, people have wrong expectations. Like, where's this team going to finish? Like, 6th doesn't really matter. Between 6th and 9th is kind of where they're at. That was even the preseason thing. Like, oh, they could be 6th to 8th. Okay, fine. Well, they're still probably going to be 6th to 8th, even if you change a head coach, because they don't have the horses, and the other teams are better right now. And the bigger problem is, if you can't find a coach that substantially moves the needle for you, like, what's the point? Like, just dump another sort of 10, 20 million in expenses on whatever the coaching staff is right now. Hope that there's no player waste additional because of who you hired that sort of Ten Hag approved. I don't know. Like, I just don't see a lot of wiggle room for them to improve stuff this season. And it feels like this was always going to be the case. It's just a media narrative around it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely true. United are an easy way to get clicks, to sell stories. But at the same time, could it not be argued that this is sort of a waste of development time? I mean, if they brought in a coach, I know, yes, it would cost money, but could you not argue that it's kind of a free hit for a coach this year, that they can spend the year kind of coaching the team and getting them in position? Or is that, to your mind, a kind of total waste of time?
Well, remember what happened to 3 different teams this summer? 3 different giant teams this summer. Like, they went out to shop in the market to find great coaches, and all 3 of them went splat. I think Barcelona did great because Flick is there now, but initially, like, that was a mess. Like, Bayern, this was a last resort. Like, they could not find somebody that they were excited by. They got turned down by 3 or 4 different German-speaking managers that were just like, yeah, I'm not going to deal with that circus. That's somebody else's problem. And then United were allegedly aggressively shopping for a head coach, but Ashworth wasn't allowed to come in, and they had some transition as well. So I'm not saying that they couldn't end up with somebody better. I'm just saying it's not a guarantee. And if it's not a guarantee, you're still spending 10 or 20 million to shunt these guys over there. The other danger is, I think, something I'm particularly attuned to, which is almost the Ole Gunnar Solskjaer problem. If he comes in and he's pretty good, but not great, but the fans get behind him and he's a club legend. So say Ben Nistelrooy replaces him. You can't move him without a PR problem, even though the next coach might be 20% better than Ben Nistelrooy. And that's something that happens a lot in Italy, where, like, you can't fire club legends unless you've got a very good reason. It's happening right now for some teams that I know and I follow pretty closely, and they're like, oh God, things behind the scenes are a complete mess here. But the owner doesn't want to get more death threats from the ultras. I don't think that United ultras are particularly aggressive these days, but they do just have to be aware of, one, just not wasting more money, because, like, money seems to be an actual thing for them, and 2, making sure that the replacement cost is not worth the burn on that.
Okay, so from that point of view, the kind of the sensible financial thing, the prudent thing, is to maybe wait. But when they come to look for a new coach, having been somebody who's worked in this kind of recruitment, how should they go about that search? How would you go about it? I know here we're getting into kind of free consulting work, but let's see how it goes.
So for those of you who don't know, StatsBomb, one of the most frequent consulting projects that we did was we would do a lot of research on head coach replacements, and we would do it under strict NDA. And basically, teams would come to us and they'd say, hey, even if we're not replacing our head coach right now, the prudent way is to have a list of guys that we've already done research on, say 10 to 20 deep, And then these are the guys that we would want to go for if we had to get rid of our head coach sometime in the 6, 12, 15, 18-month range. And so that research never disappears, right? It's useful. Coaches have a long lifespan. And so it stays, it's got a good shelf life is how I describe it. The first question is always, what style of play do you want to play? And many teams have no idea. and part of that is like, well, we just want the best coach that we can find. Well, this is the problem. The best coach you can find for a team that's aging and, sort of has a bunch of sort of 26 to 30-year-olds is quite a different coach than a team that like is 21 to 24 and needs to have some maturity and sort of be able to progress over the next couple of years. And the timelines on those things are different as well. So often we encourage teams to have like a club identity for style of play. And it's something that the biggest reason why you do it is if you have to change head coach and your head coach plays this style, and then you go to a next head coach who plays something very different from that. So say you go from Pep style, which is very ball oriented, and you need to be great passers. You need to have great passers all over the pitch. To something that's more middle block, like a Portuguese style, maybe a Nuno style, very disruptive in the center of the park, and he wants to transition a lot. But like that passing thing is like a bonus. It's not a strictly mandatory type thing. Or say you've got a guy that is very happy to play with smaller mobile players, and you bring somebody in that really cares about set pieces and sort of physicality. There's a ton of waste there if you have to change that squad. And sometimes the waste is 100, 200, 300 million pounds in the modern age at the top of the tier. So that's why we kind of talk about that stuff. What style do you want to play? And then what are the other things that you need? Do you need somebody that can kind of carry a dressing room and has some cachet behind them because you're Bayern Munich? Like that, this might be a legit thing. I think Real Madrid is another place where you look at it and say, look, if the players don't believe that you have some idea how to win, like the press will turn on you very quickly and things will leak out of the dressing room. So there is a little element of that. And then the next thing is like, do you need to work with young players a lot? Like that's a really big deal. And some coaches hate it. Like Mourinho, you could count on him never to bring young players through. And in fact, it cost Chelsea hundreds of millions of pounds and some of the best players in the world because that dude never wanted to blood the young players on a regular basis. Pep has some of that element, but maybe Pep feels like some of the materials he's being given aren't as good as he needs for his particular style, which is a different thing. So I think those are like the basic starting points. And then you hit all the other questions and what you would be fine. Have you ever been through like a corporate recruiting process, Patrick?
A little bit. Yeah. I have. God, a long time ago.
Right. So maybe somebody headhunts you, or maybe they just put out a job application. And the job application is, okay, you need to have these criteria that are mandatory, these things that would nice. And then we're going to interview you 3 times to make sure that you're, good for this high paid role. Many times in the recruitment process for coaches, it's like, who do you know that you think would be a good fit? And you ask like the coaches sort of around the way, or the director of football and a couple of agents. And that's not at all the way that like you should hire something that's going to be paid anywhere between 5 and 25 million pounds, which is effectively the going rate for a head coach. And so it's one of those areas where you get these billion-pound entities that have no idea how to hire properly for the most important role in the entire club and the entire business. They do it elsewhere to a pretty decent extent, but in that one, they just fall flat on their faces. It's something that's being slowly modernized, but it's still like a very up and down, hit or miss type process.
Okay. It's interesting to hear about because, like what we kind of hear through the press is like, oh, we've put 2 and 2 together and we've decided that it would make sense that United would be interested in Carrick or McKenna or Van Nistelrooy or whoever it might be. Okay, so let's say then that United say, what would they probably say is we don't have to play like a crazy possession style. We'd like to play an aggressive, relatively direct style. We want somebody who's happy, obviously working, like not having total control over the transfers, clearly. We would like somebody who's comfortable bringing through these young players and also integrating academy players where they've had some success recently. Given those parameters, which I think are fairly likely for United, is there anybody who stands out to you? Because obviously there are lots of guys who are unemployed right now, plus a few who are employed, but maybe have links to United.
So the sort of third tier challenge on this one is how much of a pain in the ass are you willing to allow the head coach to be? And I say this as somebody who championed Antonio Conte for quite a long time and thought he was like a truly outstanding coach, and he is.
Yeah.
And I thought the hire at Chelsea was excellent, and he did turn them around, and they won a title with him. But also, like, he's just a headache, and everywhere that he goes, like, is a little bit miserable, and he like loves to mouth off to the press and cause problems, like even if he says that he doesn't. So he's one. I think Tuchel's a different type of headache where like Tuchel just doesn't seem like he's got great soft skills. And I think that he's a very good tactical coach in many ways. I think that he's somebody that has been open to learning in the past, but because he doesn't have great soft skills, he will eventually end up irritating a bunch of people in the space because it's very competitive and he has opinions and he wants to make sure that he has a chance to win. So I think Tuchel's probably the best available at the moment. And then you get into the broader list, and the broader list is like really interesting because you get the Manchester United media guys that want to leak their friends or people that they're connected to, and you get the ones that make a lot of sense, but you don't know if they'd want to come there or if they want a multi-year project. Some people want to just go in and they want it to be ready, and that's not quite where United's at right now. You get the former player ones that are a little more off the beaten path. So Van Nistelrooy is an assistant right now, but I think the best United coaching person at the moment is Michael Carrick. Carrick's teams don't have good shot locations, but they're doing some unusually impressive stuff down in the English Championship right now, like 17, 18 shots to 8 with Middlesbrough, who don't have great talent. That's a pretty decent indicator that like he might be able to step up a bit like Kompany did in terms of style of play. And so you want to look at that style of play, but you got to teach him and you need to push him right now to say, Michael, we see you as a potential manager for Manchester United, but one, we kind of like set pieces, so we want to incorporate that more. But two, you got to improve your shots better than 7% a shot. Because if you do that in the Premier League, like we're going to finish in an AVB world. Like where you're riding the variance of your finishers and the goalkeepers at the other end who are pretty good these days. Our Slack had a great conversation, a genuinely great conversation about potential head coaches and who might replace whom and how long the stint is there for. And, you don't want to redo the Solskjaer sort of era. Van Nistelrooy is a little unknown and again, a challenging personality. Nagelsmann is probably the most exciting one that you might take. Luis Enrique, I think, would struggle in the English language one. So there's this list of ones that are a little further afield. And you also don't know what Dan Ashworth wants. Like Dan Ashworth has had some pretty interesting head coaches. He had a great collaboration with Graham Potter. And so that's like a potential. And Potter's style might be something that's pretty interesting to United as well. Like we haven't seen him. I thought his Chelsea teams were pretty unlucky. And we'll see. So I don't think it's a list littered with bad names. I think United can successfully sort of hire somebody next when they're ready. But unless they get the person that they want right now, then it makes no sense to move on from Ten Hag because like you can't really save this season because the personnel isn't there to save it.
Yeah, agreed. I think it would be, from my point of view, I think I root for chaos, and I think it would be very fun to see them turn this over. But of course, the problem is as well that when we're talking about this, we're trying to gauge how we think a smart team should behave versus what United are going to do. And it feels like United have the United way, which is kind of we've got a bunch of guys. I don't know. This was, like you say, this was recommended by this guy. Southgate. That name has been out there for a long time. The other guy who's interesting, I guess, is McKenna, who it feels like who turned down the Chelsea job in the summer. I think quite wisely. And I think there's a feeling among United fans that maybe he's holding out for the United job at some stage, having come through the kind of coaching staff there. How do you think that would fit? I mean, obviously it's kind of hard to gauge right now, but does he seem like somebody who would be an interesting fit for the problems United are going to face?
I feel like Graham Potter's probably a step beyond that at the moment, right? Like, he's got a little more blooding. He's been in, oh God, I just almost said he's been in the league. He knows the league.
He's been in the league.
Patrick, who am I?
You're a proper football man now.
I think McKenna is probably going to be a very good hire for somebody. If his Ipswich team stays up, then that's again fairly impressive because I think that they were definitely dubbed to be one of the three that go down. I think he's talented. He's still very young. I think maybe you can see Hertzler sort of making some mistakes over at Brighton as well, or his players making mistakes, and he may need to learn how to be resilient. Reps are a big deal, and Kompany getting sort of more than 2 years of time to be able to coach either Burnley or he was I think over at was it Anderlecht before. Reps, people won't know. You don't learn coaching via a manual. They will give you a coaching manual, but say you wanted to go in and learn Jurgen Klopp's style of defense. There's no manual for that. And you don't just get a book that says that, so these are the 50 exercises that you need to complete to understand how to coach like Jurgen Klopp, right? And this is true across the whole space. And some places will teach you a couple of different styles, like Coverciano in Italy. When they give you your coaching badges, they've intentionally taught you at least a couple of different styles coming out of Coverciano. Doesn't mean that it's the ideal style. It doesn't mean that's what you grew up with, but at least you're learning to be a little bit adaptive. Other licensing countries are different in how they do it. I think Spain's pretty good as well, but coaches have to learn not only via learning sort of some things, they have to do it over and over, and they have to prepare for different types of opponents, and they have to see different problems. So this guy is a right winger, our left back cannot handle that guy, and so how do we adapt in my system in order to be able to control against that? Or we haven't seen this style of play regularly, so what are we going to do about it? Or we're particularly bad at either attacking or defending in these ways. You only get that through reps, and you also only get that through correcting players in training. So you have to go in and say, hey, you don't need to do it this way. You need to do it that way. It's a whole giant communication problem, as well as a teaching problem, as well as an analysis problem. And this is why I think that there are no teams in the world right now that have really solved coach education at the highest level outside of maybe the Red Bull Group. When you look at it from that perspective, you end up thinking, reps are more important than I thought they were. We should never count out coaches that have failed the first time, especially on a short stint, because they're probably potentially going to be better. And if we know that they're open to learning stuff and dynamic, they could be future coaches that could succeed again. But plenty of coaches are egotistical guys that just think that they have all the answers, and so you want to drum them out of the process too. So it is a really hard question.
Yeah. I as you were talking about that, I was thinking about Luis Enrique, who of course had that stint at Roma, I think, then ended up at Barcelona, managed to work out look, he had a great front line, but he did have to work out a problem with getting that front line to gel together, and did it while transforming Barcelona's style. It's interesting. Is this just a situation where you just have to interview a coach to get a sense of whether they are open to learning? Because, for example, when Eddie Howe was appointed Newcastle manager, I hated that appointment because I felt Eddie Howe's Bournemouth side had often got fairly lucky in a bunch of ways, had been pretty lucky to stay in the Premier League given how bad their defence had been. And I wasn't sure that he could come in and play a different style, but it was talked about that he'd gone and looked at Atleti and stuff, and suddenly he was playing this really horrible, pressing, gummy midfield. Is there any way to kind of see this beyond just an interview with the manager, do you think?
Yeah, you can talk to them about it. And you need somebody that can. Someone in the comments on YouTube said you should bring on a tactical person in order to complement the stats takes. And I'm just like, wow, that was mean. We have a lot of history in tactical stuff. But yeah, I think that what I can say there is you can listen to them, but people will lie to get jobs. Right. And this is actually constant. Right. And so if you ask them the explicit question, hey, are you interested in learning? And we will only take coaches that are interested in learning at this job. They will say, yes, of course I am. Who's not? Patrick, are you interested in learning?
No, never.
No. Okay. Well, see, you've made it easy for me. We're just ruling you out. So people will lie to get jobs. And what you need to do is actually be able to ask very detailed questions that give substantive answers on how they're going to do X, Y, Z. And you also need to be able to call bullshit on those answers. And that's a tough interview process. And so that's another reason why I think teams often fail to find the right coach immediately. They have to go through a couple different hires, which is very expensive. Yeah, I don't know. Like I think Howe's better than he was. I think I would not allow him to be in charge of recruitment, and I think Newcastle made that choice because I think that he gets blinders a little bit. I think that he doesn't have the breadth that you need for the Premier League these days. But I think, much like you, I think that he has proven to be a better head coach now than I thought he could have been coming out of Bournemouth.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think it's an interesting situation with United. Currently, the noise is that they are going to stick with Ten Hag for the foreseeable future. Fortunately, I've got a Dutch passport, so I assume that I'll be getting the call from United any day now. And my dad as well, even though he's never watched a game of football in his life.
We had a bunch of quants at StatsBomb, and they decided they wanted to hire somebody, and they hired a quant from StatsBomb, and they managed to find the Dutch guy. That was like 2 years ago. God. And I was just like, well done, you guys, but you kind of have a pattern now.
They're like Athletic Club, but just with Dutch guys. It's kind of amazing. There's going to be one of these things where, like, in 100 years, somebody will be looking at kind of like births and deaths, and they'll be like, why were there all these people in Manchester around this period born who are all called stuff like, like Rude and Duck and all these kind of names? Let's move on to Chelsea. This was not a game to watch if you enjoy quality passing out of the back, I think. Chelsea, though, put up a bunch of XG. Comfortably, good for the win. Cole Palmer scored 4. How do we feel about Chelsea's start to the season? Before we move on to Palmer, who deserves his own little section, how do you feel about Chelsea's start to the season? Because now, numbers-wise, they're kind of 4th, 5th in the league, expected goal difference. It's been better than we expected, maybe? I don't know.
I think my question was about Maresca and how he would adapt the game plan for teams that were sort of tougher in the schedule. And I think with this game in particular, they chose some very good tactical choices. So their pressing triggers were really good. We did not realize like how ropey. I mean, I kind of realized it last week when it happened, and I flagged it in the roundup in the newsletter. But their back line is more ropey about playing out than you would expect, and Hertzler has a job to do about making those boys sort of play in a style that is less risky, because they've gotten blown up I think 3 different times over the last 2 weeks, and just immediately given away goals. This one, there was one where Webster, I think, was passing out, got blown up. Kadioglu also got blown up, so it wasn't just a center back problem. And those created very easy goals for Nico Jackson, or, well, not Nico Jackson, but Nico Jackson then passed to Palmer. Palmer did not have a tough day at the office in these finishes, but he is the type of player that is an excellent finisher, a bit like Phil Foden. I think he's a surprisingly good ball striker that has other elements to his game that he's good at. So given that these were tactical choices and they needed to make that choice, I think that Maresca is proving that he's better than baseline average, which is actually pretty good in the Premier League. And it's possible that he's good. Now, I don't think they're sort of fully playing like a good style. I think that, Bournemouth gave them a lot of trouble down south. And so I think that, there's still open questions there, but, running out 4-2 against a Brighton team that had previously been quite good this season, even if they had some fragilities that he saw and helped coach into that team, that's a good result.
Yeah. And it is interesting to think about those fragilities in Brighton, given that it feels like they have prioritized ball playing in that back line. Kadioglu, we've had questions about, but he is a guy who profiled as a very good passer. So an interesting thing to keep an eye on. Very young.
They're young though, and so that is one of the risks that you get when you've got young guys that you want to play an aggressive style. Like, all of their choices are not so obvious, and if they're not used to it, or they have to go into a different style of play because their first option is, it's not there for them, like, you get some mistakes. I think the worry for Chelsea is the exact same problem that Brighton had, which basically they gave up 2 goals trying to play out of the back off of goal kicks. Like, that's that's terrifying. And it was such a bad, like the Baleba goal was just like, hey, oh,
Yeah.
look, here's the ball. I just stepped right in front of this guy, and then I've got the entirety of the 18 that's clear for me. I'm just going to shoot it home. So it was a mess of a game. But, Palmer and Nicolas Jackson particularly came out in credit.
Yeah, Jackson's had a really, really hot start to the season, and kind of has deserved it. I think at the end of last season was getting a lot of criticism for, all the kind of social media stats where they're like big chances missed and all this kind of garbage. Palmer, though, I think now he's on 10 goal involvements in 6 games in the Premier League this season. This is just one of the best players in the world, right?
It's possible. And I think that City fans have to feel a little frustrated about that. Although not that they really need anybody up in the attack side of it. They need more of the defending midfield perspective. But like I said, he's a very good ball striker. He has the correct dominant foot. That free kick was a laser beam into the top 90, and they actually screened it. So that's one of the reasons why it got there, because otherwise I think the goalkeeper wouldn't have hesitated and he would have gotten there. Important element on set pieces, again, like the detail work in set pieces really comes to pay off. And if you've got players that can do that, that's important too. But no, I think Palmer is the type of guy that you look at and you say he might be a top 10 attacker in the Premier League right now. The thing that strikes me as discordant is, like, obviously we follow the transfer rumors, and you keep seeing Osimhen chat come up, and Chelsea definitely missed out on him in the summertime. And there's no possible chance I would spend on Osimhen and put him in place of Jackson right now. Like, none. Why would you? Like, you would go somewhere else to do that, especially given the prices bandied about. That attack is something that's clicking. It's the problem is like the defensive side and simply the possession football that they need to do more work on.
Yeah, I mean, in attack as well, they've just got so many weapons, and there are weapons there that they've kind of forgotten they have, even at this stage. Like, every time I talk to a Chelsea fan, we talk for about 5 minutes before we remember that somebody like Mudryk exists. Well, they obviously spent.
He's not somebody that should ever start for them. So,
well, I would like him to start for them from that point of view. I would also like Pedro Neto to start for them. That would also be great. Okay, so how do you look to develop somebody like Palmer? Do you just kind of like let him do what he wants? Do you try and assign him a particular position? Do you try and think, well, he's going to be this in the long term? I don't know.
I think in his attacking sort of outlook, you kind of leave him be. Okay. But what you need to do is you need to drill into him like regimented defensive responsibilities. And you also need to teach him to make sure that his pressing triggers are correct from the front, because you still need to have a lot of that in the Premier League right now. And you need to make sure that his tactical fouling is on point. That is a thing that needs to be coached in. I know it sounds silly, but like tactical foulings are a really big deal in the league these days. It was always a big deal, but most people never talked about it. But the top teams were able to get away with breaking up more and more of the potential counterattacks against them, because their forwards would pick up fouls, and they would do it in a casual, subtle way, and they could also spread it out across the front line, so that if somebody else got a yellow, then you kind of like, somebody else was in charge of make sure they break things up more. So that type of responsibility for Palmer is something that's really important, because he is playing up front, central, or sort of in channels. If he gets to the point that he's elite at that, then he's awesome at everything, because I think that he has the passing ability. He can beat a man on the dribble. He's not huge, but I think that he's strong enough to do well against most of the players in the league, which I think is a little bit of a surprise. He looks lanky. He doesn't look like he has the build to be able to body guys off. And then, being able to hit the ball real hard where you want it to go is a very useful thing to be as a forward.
Yeah, it was just interesting to me because obviously after this game, suddenly he was being compared to Van Persie and Bergkamp and people like this, and it was kind of interesting to see him compared to, I mean, look, creative forwards, but real strikers more, or rather than the kind of right winger number 10 tweener that we maybe think of him as being.
His position's still the most valuable in the world, though, because it's the least filled by players that have a wicked left foot. And people probably like, oh, well, that's ridiculous. Like center back and center forward are still the most valuable places in the world. Technically, this might be true, but if you wanted to sort of build a squad that is a level above everybody else's squad, if you have an awesome right wide forward and they do not, like, you have a huge edge. It's all like if you have an awesome left back and they do not, you have a huge edge, because those things are like 15% of the population. And so it's just really this weirdo distribution thing. Saka, Salah, maybe Cole Palmer, Phil Foden, like all those guys have great left feet. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. And you will have some on the right side that sort of fit that profile, like Musiala. I watched Musiala this weekend, obviously, and yeah, he sort of is that way on the right hand side. It feels like you can get more of them, or you get more variability out of the right hand side. Like you'll get more sort of pure pace guys. But if you have a creative right wide forward that can also set up their teammates for goals, it's a great building block for a Champions League team.
Yeah, and it is absolutely amazing to watch the stuff that Palmer was doing in this game. You know, the pass that he plays over the top that Jackson actually takes great touch, but then it gets blocked off by the defender. Yeah, when that happened, I was just like, oh, Jesus. Like, you know the film High Fidelity?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, there's a bit in that when they find like the mixtape made by the little skate kids, and Jack Black kind of puts his head in his hands and says, "It's really fucking good."
Yeah,
that's how I feel whenever Palmer does something great. I'm just like, oh, this guy's really fucking good. It makes me want to be sick.
I'd forgotten that James Justin existed. I remember like him being recruited ages ago, and I just like, oh wow, there's this guy. And then he had just the most beautiful strike of the weekend, like just the purest thing. I watched that over and over and over again. Like you could set it to music, and it would be just like this. You could actually, it's an entire thing on YouTube, isn't it? Like children set these things to music, and never mind.
Probably
I'm like
videos.
a million years behind the curve here.
Okay, well, I think that's enough positivity about Cole Palmer. Shall we finish up with just a little hit of Madrid Derby, which it was an interesting weekend in La Liga because Barcelona lost 4-2 to Osasuna. That's interesting. And then you had this 1-1 draw at the Wanda. Goals from Militao and Correa. There was a red card as well, obviously. Atletico Madrid still playing smothering defense. I mean, it was like 0.8 XG they gave up in this game. The defense does seem, I mean, I know I've talked about this several times now, but the defense does seem to be seriously rolling right now.
Yeah, Simeone managed to crank that back into position. Gallagher has a lot of credit for that. They were missing the Bulldog Terrier in the midfield, and Connor, as he said, he feels like he could have played here his entire career because he has that type of element about him. He came off in like the 69th because they were trailing by a goal. Real Madrid's attack is not there right now, and they still don't know kind of how to do it. Endrick's shots, like, does he realize that he has like the best midfielders in the world around, and forwards around him? Because like, I mean, that kid is way better than he should be right now. But also, like, you're not playing in Brazil with a bunch of nobodies. You have like just sometimes your hold up play can actually hold up. And you can pass it to your teammates who can then get easy chances as opposed to you shooting from long range and hoping you score. This was not a good game to watch. It was not like fun. It was not a display of beautiful technique. And then obviously the nonsense that happens in Spain right now, whenever Vinny sort of comes to light, and even worse, like if you're a fan, your job is to be there. You've paid to be there to support your team and to help your team. Like your job is not to get irritated because Thibaut Courtois may or may not have antagonized you into potentially throwing things. Like, are you kidding me? Like the best rivalries in the world are the ones that like you hate some people on the other team, but you hate them in a fandom positive way, not in a I'm going to throw things and be racist and potentially stop and potentially forfeit the match, which was like the next level of cancellation that the referee would have gone to. So this was, the ref blew them off for 10 minutes. The Simeone and Coquet tried to calm them down. It's really difficult to separate that part of this from this match. And we know that there'll be another one at the Bernabeu, and we don't know if like that will then escalate into weird stuff or not. These two teams are still trying to find their identity in certain parts of the game. I'm sure Simeone's happy that they defend well, even against the good teams. I'm sure Carlo's not happy with how they attack yet. He's hoping that they'll gel over time, and they do have that time, especially since Barcelona are young and injured, so they won't necessarily be able to run away with the league. But I don't know. Did you have anything particular that you wanted to point out from it? Because I know that I'm kind of ranting about elements that frustrated me.
No, I kind of agree with it. I agree with what you're saying. It's very difficult to separate performance from the off-pitch stuff or semi-off-pitch stuff, because I was thinking, okay, well, this was not a very effective game from Real Madrid's attackers. They played that diamond midfield, no Mbappe. And so you had Vinny Rodrigo up front, and they attempted 7 dribbles, 1 completed, 0 carries into the penalty area, which is very unusual for Vinicius. But this is a league that has normalized racist abuse, especially of Vinny. Every time this happens, the attitude is, in fact, it is openly said by people in the hierarchy of Spanish football, well, he provokes people. He provokes people. The problem is that he's not dignified in the face of racism, or he's not nice enough to the racists, and it just feels, I don't know, it just feels ludicrous. So I think there are interesting things about this game. I found it interesting that neither side really pressed much at all.
I think they're actually scared of the skill. And so if one guy gets beat out of that press, then suddenly the whole shape breaks up. And I think they're actually like, against highly skilled teams, like, you have to be careful about it. It's ballsy to press at that level. And again, sometimes if they're younger players, like, you get to have the results that both Brighton and Chelsea had in their press this weekend. But usually Real Madrid and Atletico have a bit more seasoning about them. And yeah, it's dangerous.
Okay. Well, look, I don't have anything more intelligent to say. I've got to admit it. So I think maybe that brings us to a close for today. Thank you very much for the comments, the questions, the likes, the subscriptions that everybody has been giving us. If you enjoyed this video, please do like it and subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to it as an audio podcast, then please leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. You can always send us questions on YouTube or replying to the Transfer Flows Twitter account. Make sure that you're subscribed to the newsletter if you're not, because it's still the best place to get the most intelligent coverage, I think, of European football right now. Thanks very much, Ted. It's always great to hear your takes on the matches. And I've got to kind of commiserate you, because I thought it was good. It's good that you've called the betting stuff variance betting, because it does feel like the variance is beating your ass right now.
It happens. Look, I have had times where I've lost into December before, and actually I think it's harder to bet than it has been before. Don't take it too emotionally, but it's something that I care a lot about, and it's typically in the past been a skill game, and so maybe I'm bad at it, but for the most part, we've seen historically that this stuff wins out over time. And yeah, there are just matches that weird stuff happens in football, and you're on the other side of the weird stuff. You're like, oh man, but that's okay. That's part of the fun of the game.
Just before we finish, is what's the situation with subscription to variance betting? I know there's been a deal on up till now with subscriptions. Is that still available?
Yeah, so we are in the last day of September. In October, we're going to switch over. So there's a price increase. We had an early bird price, effectively. If you're a subscriber right now, you'll get the option to purchase 1 year at the early bird price. So you still have about 24 hours to hop in. I know we're posting this late. We'll give you an extra day, so we'll let that continue to October 2nd. If those of you are interested, we've got already 400 subs on the premium side of the betting. People have been really happy with the analysis, and you're not buying my picks. I'm telling you what I'm betting on, but I'm also explaining why, and I'm doing analysis to help you find your own stuff. And I think people actually appreciate that. It's not nearly as noisy or as obnoxious as most of the gambling content in the world, which already helps it stand out. And maybe it helps it also stand out that I used to be a professional, and we're giving you the same level of some analysis anyway that we would for any sort of giant syndicate that bets on this stuff.
I think it's really cool, and I think it also helps, even just as a fan, to kind of join up your thinking about these kind of things. I think it helps you understand what to look for on the field as well. Thank you very much, Ted. I really enjoyed it, and thank you to you guys for listening, watching. We'll catch you with another episode in a couple of days' time. Bye bye.